Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. I'm sitting here trying to figure out how I want to introduce today's show because I'm thinking about the conversation you and I just had before we came on the show, and I can't talk about any of it, but I really want to, but I can't. So I just give me a moment. I need to just calm down and just get into a good mind space, you know.
To our audience, Walt was very inappropriate before the show, and I walked him back from that. That's all I can say.
True statement, just reverse the names. Anyway.
That's true.
No, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. I kind of wish people could hear it, but we don't want to go that way.
No.
What I do want to do, though, this is something I wanted to talk about for a bit. You may have seen this popping up a lot. I'm seeing this quite a bit. I'm seeing memes and so forth that, in my opinion, are misusing the word attachment. I saw one recently that basically said that love and attachment are basically two entirely different things, that love is the real thing and that attachment is the unhealthy form of love. And I'm pretty sure what they really meant was dependency or codependency, but they used the word attachment, and I'm seeing that a lot, and that bothers me because true attachment it's bond. It's connection to somebody else. It has nothing to do with something unhealthy or codependent or anything else like that. So I guess I just wanted to start off by bringing that out and asking, have you seen the same thing? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Well, yeah. What seems to happen, especially with social media, TikTok, and all that, there's like psychology words that get boosted, like they all of a sudden, and everybody's using them wildly inappropriate, and not inappropriate as much as misuse them. And attachment, there's an attachment disorder that suggests that usually kids that have been abandoned or in foster care develop an attachment disorder. So what that means is they have the inability to attach appropriately to a loved one, or people that try to adopt them. They spend their entire life usually never being able to totally attach. So that's the disorder side of it. But somehow they leave the disorder off and they try to commandeer the attach part.
Right.
So it's much more complicated than TikTok, as shocking as it may be, the well-educated TikTok people that are talking about the words, and it's just out of context, and it dies over usually. But I noticed that it's like whatever the word of the day. Like a while back, like for example, love, being deeply in love is often mistaken for being in limerence. We talked about limerence before.
Right.
Limerence is not love. It feels just like love. It feels like there's that concept, but it is not love. And not doesn't mean you can't be in love, obviously, but there's some people that get into limerence, and they're usually loving people or think they're loving people that don't love them back. They get attached to it. And so that word was wild for a while, but I have noticed that. And then the good news, that word will cycle away and the new word will come up.
This is true. Yes, you can always count on that to happen.
Yeah.
It grabbed my attention though, because I have come to appreciate not just the importance of words, but of the vibration behind words, largely because of the conversations we've had here on the program about how vibration affects what you attract in your life and all that sort of thing. And so when I hear a word being commandeered and used in a way that really isn't appropriate, and that actually takes a good word and turns it into a not good word or into a bad word, that bothers me, because we have a large vocabulary of negative words. The vocabulary of positive words is considerably smaller. So we really don't want to lose any of them. They're good. They're useful.
Yeah. Well, and one thing too, in psychology in general, so you have traditional psychology, traditional thought, traditional therapy. And then you have, like, one of the things that are used by many people is neuro-linguistic programming. It's usually not used by traditional psychologists. Right. And within that, they use the word dissociation in a positive notion. In NLP. Is it sort of like a protective mechanism of the body is to dissociate, it's protective, it's this, that.
Right.
Whereas in traditional psychology, dissociation almost suggests there's a mental illness dissociating the inability to dictate reality.
Right.
And so even within the branches or the genres of or the modalities, there's a difference sometimes. And so people in their field will pick up like a traditional psychologist that was being trained in neuro linguistic programming when I was actually doing the training, really had a hard time accepting dissociation in the way we were doing it. So, it took a while for her to just accept it's the same word, but it's not indicating the same thing. So
Right.
often people will pick stuff up and not really understand, and it's really hard to explain.
It's a great point. And what goes along with it, I think, is that because of the challenges that are associated with using words in different ways with different meanings, different contexts, and so forth, it creates confusion. And if there's one thing that we really don't need right now, it's more confusion, because there's a lot of stuff to get confused about today.
Yeah.
To be
Oh,
perfectly
yeah.
blunt, So I don't know. I think it's kind of important to separate how we're going to use the words and which words we're going to use and so forth. Now, like you're demonstrating through the example you just gave, words can be used in different ways. Dissociative, for instance, can be used in very, very different ways. But at the very least, shouldn't we have some idea of what we're talking about when we're saying it, and tie that in to the way we're using the word?
Exactly. That's why, like, using dissociation, for example, dissociation is one of the body's ways to protect, the mind's way to protect. In vicious situations, sometimes people dissociate from that situation because it's too much to handle.
Right.
And so they can dissociate. So that is a mechanism that's not a disorder. There's dissociative disorder where people dissociate all the time, but dissociation is a protective mechanism within the body. So the reason I didn't go into that intricacy there is a lot of people talk and they don't understand and they butcher the concepts.
Right. And that creates more confusion.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just creates more confusion. It creates more argument, and that dilutes the value of both. When people don't have a full understanding of what you're talking about, then it leaves it open to, it can be harmful when you're using it the wrong way, particularly when you're not explaining it. Like if I were doing an NLP session with a client, I would explain all of this so they would understand the difference in dissociation. I would explain that. So if they go to a traditional therapist, I don't want them to say, well, Joel says I'm dissociating, in the way that the therapist would look at, you know what I mean? That's, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, they would be right. That's not what I'm saying. So I make sure they know. So when in today's world, you got to be really careful with all the misinformation out there, to make sure that if you're going to tackle a topic, you really need to know what you're talking about. Like, I always see on Instagram, they'll have something like, right now, the greatest sleep aid in the world is magnesium. Magnesium does all these wonderful things. Magnesium is a necessary nutrient.
Absolutely.
There's no argument, and it helps calm, it relaxes the blood vessels, it helps calm you. There's a lot that magnesium does. But it's not a brand new innovative sleep aid, and it's an element, and we have a lot of elements out there, and it's just something that you do need plenty of. By the way, I hope everybody takes magnesium, because our soils are very depleted. We need additional sources of magnesium. All of that's true, and once again, it's that we use it like, will it help you sleep? If you have a magnesium deficiency and have trouble sleeping, it may help that. If you're fully loaded with magnesium, it's not going to make a world of difference.
Not going to do anything else.
Yeah. But you'll see that, and a lot of times it sells gimmicks, and they will use a bunch of studies, but the studies again are skewed to their point. They leave out the most important part of the study, that this is a magnesium depleted group of people took magnesium and helped them sleep better, and they were calmer.
Which brings me to what I think is I'm not sure how to characterize it. It's one of the major themes going on, in my opinion, in the current times that we live in, which is, I think we're living in an era where people are in some ways being forced, in many ways being challenged to learn discernment.
Yes.
And we've talked about discernment quite a bit here on the show. But specifically now with everything that goes on out there, and I know that you don't know about most of it because you don't pay attention to the news, but I know you're aware of it anyway to some degree because
Some degree, and some of the stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and a large chunk of it has to do with discerning what's really going on with it, what the messages are really all about. Like, for instance, now this is myself. The way I often deal with things where words are concerned, because we were talking about words a moment ago, is if I'm not really clear, I can't really trust that somebody's going to do what you do. I mean, what you do is great because you actually explain this is what the background is. This is where what the real origin of the word is and how it's used and all that kind of stuff. But most people don't do that, so we really can't count on that from most people.
Right.
What I usually do is I like to do searches on etymology of words, because etymology is the origin of the words. Where did it all come from? And that's my way of kind of like getting to the root of it and understanding what the word is really all about, and then comparing it to what I'm hearing about how it's being used and so forth. And so that's how I make sense out of it. Now, that's not appropriate for everybody. But my point of bringing that up is we need to have strategies for how we are going to deal with not just words, but concepts that come our way that do have confusion attached to them, because that's how we're going to learn discernment. The question is, what are those strategies?
Well, that would be a great thing. One of the downsides is, especially in some of the political divides and the way things are now, a lot of people aren't interested in discernment. They know what they're doing. They don't want it. You know what I mean? So finding the group in the middle, like you're talking about, that is, how do I do that? How do I use discernment? What is that thing? What mechanism? How do I get there? The problem is, at least as I'm observing, neither side wants to get there.
That's true. Yeah. And I think it's also fair to remember that what I'm talking about here is really only for somebody who's actually willing to make a change, to think about something, to actually work it through. The person you're describing, they've got all the answers. It's all ironed out. I know exactly what the truth is. It's the only right truth, and so on and so forth. Well, yeah. They're probably not even listening to the podcast in the first place.
Well, they would already call the police on us, so it doesn't.
Yeah,
matter.
right. Especially if they heard the pre-show content. Well, we won't even go there, but
yeah. One of the things that, and I wish I remember who did this. There was a video of this guy, and he went around and he interviewed people saying, I'm going to give you the policies of President George Bush and the policies of President Obama, and tell me if you agree or disagree with those policies. And so he would read the policy. President Obama implemented this. Oh, I hated that. That was a ridiculous idea.
Right.
President Bush did this. Oh, that was great. Well, at the end of the day, they switched the questions. So he was giving them but people didn't actually listen to what he was saying.
Right.
They went with the person, whatever political thing they were going to do. So a lot of times it's filtered. One of the things that I love, and we don't get political often. I'm not trying to get political, but one thing that I did notice. So when all of my very, very right-wing friends, we hate electric cars, we hate Elon Musk, we hate all this stuff, it's terrible, get rid of it. Then Elon Musk gets on their side. Well, yes, we need to protect Tesla. It's like, now, and also for the left, Elon Musk was like a good guy promoting good stuff. Then they flip to, it's the same man perspective. Exactly. And I'm not taking any sides. You know that, I don't care. But I've just found that interesting, just the shift, and both sides just flip, and they don't realize it. It's like, oh no, it's like, how did we get there? So often, like you're saying, it's we talked last week about the law of proximity. That applies to your political beliefs. Where you're born has the biggest influence on what you believe.
Oh yeah,
because you grow up around it. I grew up in a Southern Baptist town, very conservative, very religious. Somebody that grew up in, just Midtown Manhattan had an entirely different view of life. We're a small Southern town, traditional values, all this stuff. New York City, tough roll, all this other stuff. And if we look at it, we're on my upbringing was about well, there's no other answer than what we say. And of course, you know my brain, how it works. The moment they're telling me there's no other answer, I'm going, well, that's, even at 10 years old, I'm like, no, we can't do that. You know, because that's, you know, I knew that. If they have a belief, like my mom was saying that, well, because they believe differently than we do, they're wrong. And because there's only one answer in her book, and that was
Right.
the, you know, the Southern Baptists go that way.
Sure.
And anybody that had anything other than that, it was absolutely not that. They're just, you know, and you when I realized that the rigidity of that, it just can't possibly be true.
And what you're touching on, I mean, literally you're touching on something that gets addressed in Poli-Sci 101. I mean, I was a political science major in school, so that's why I know. That's one of the things they talk about. Literally, whatever your parents' political beliefs are, 75 to 80% likelihood you're going to have the same beliefs. It's that high a percentage.
Yeah.
And it's been consistent like that for decades. This is not something that's new. This has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with the current political divide. It has to do with
who
are your parents.
Yeah, I mean, my childhood, it was the same thing. You know, it was just as passionate, just the same thing. It was, in fact, when I got to be 12, and I just knew there was something other. I never doubted. All these are my opinions. I never doubted what I consider God. There's an energy. I felt that. I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
So I never debated a God. I debated the silliness of religion. In my opinion, silliness of religion. That made no sense. There were so many inconsistencies. And so I went on a search that it was so, I was blocked from finding. I didn't have the internet back then. So I there was no way for me to get access to the things that were out there that I knew was there. And turns out they were there. Found them later. And as soon as I found them, I knew instantly what it was talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. And by the way, I'm probably going to hell too, because I have the same kind of belief, but that's okay. You know, we'll have a good time there. You know?
We will have a blast. In fact,
I think so. Yeah.
I think we'll elevate hell. I think we really will.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
It's going to be the place to be.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, what we're talking about here is just how potent, how powerful these attitudes and beliefs are that get handed down from generation to generation. And when there's a shift that happens, and by the way, since it's 75 to 80% on political beliefs, that means there's a 20 to 25% chance that you're not going to be the same as your parents. So there is at least some room for change to happen. But when it's that heavy a level thing, and that's just politics, I mean, we pick up all kinds of stuff from our parents,
Right.
Especially if they are directly in our lives. If there's like a father who disappeared, he's not really part of the life. Same rule doesn't apply anymore.
Right, of course.
You know, he has to actually physically be there, or she has to actually physically be there. But as long as they are, it's going to affect you in a lot of different ways. And one of the most interesting ones from my perspective is how many times a child will grow up and say, I'm going to raise my children different from the way my parent raised me because they got X wrong. And I want to make sure I don't get X wrong. And then what's really fascinating after that is they reproduce the same result.
Completely.
What happened? I mean, how could that be? That's the first thing that comes to your mind. Like, well, I was going to do it differently. Why do I get the same result?
Yes. So, it's you see that because we have the intention. One of the things that we are programmed by our parents' behavior, what we do. So it's built into a subconscious routine for us. So even though we say we hate it and we're not going to do it, we often do the exact same thing. And one of the things for me that I was adamant about with my kids is, and this is where I took it to heart. When I was a kid, as I was mentioning, religious wise, I was just told, this is it, nothing else. You must adhere to this. You're going to burn in hell if you don't do all this. And I said, there's never going to be a scenario where I want to make my kids do that. Ever. And, so I did the opposite. I explained to them the concept of religion, all the multiple religions. I explained what I believe, and I told them I'm not asking them to believe what I believe. It took me a long time to develop that. I would love for them to develop what they believe. And it was good. And they'd ask me a lot of questions. And so, my oldest son, TJ, who, passed away, he came to the analogies. He went through them all over the years. He looked at it. He also had that sort of rebellious side. So he wasn't going to believe what I believe just because
of course.
he would never conform, But I kept telling him, I'm good with that. You don't have to believe anything. I just want you to understand that I want you to develop whatever you believe in the systems. And he goes, do you really believe what you believe? And I said, with all my heart. It's just, I have proof and evidence of that. I said, but it took me until, in my mid 30s before I got there. And so he got to a point, he goes, yeah, I hate to admit it, but what you're telling me makes the most sense. It's what I and I said, well, don't do that. See what happens. But you get there. But what I'm fascinated about is I come from a very different background than you. Many different people, but so many end up here. We all end up at the same. It's like people that go through a bunch of stuff that have a lot of journey to travel, we end up at the same place, which I find very suspicious and fascinating.
I agree. Yeah. Well, that's part of my experience doing the podcast, because as you know, for the first number of years, you and I just were doing it partnering once a week. And then later on, I added more co-hosts and so forth. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to bring guests on a regular basis. I'm fascinated how often, even though we don't make law of attraction the main topic anymore on any of those shows where the guests are on, amazed how many of those guests come on and make it a point to tell me that they're believers in law of attraction. I didn't even ask them.
Right.
They just it's like, wait a minute, where'd that come from?
Well, because I, in my journey and all the stuff and having faced, all the stuff I faced and the law of attraction, it's not a religion. It's a law.
It's a law.
It's how it operates. It's I don't have a religious belief in gravity. I'm grateful for it, but nonetheless, it doesn't.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't. The law of attraction doesn't care if I do good or bad. It doesn't. And but the idea that there is a behind that, there's an energy, and the law of attraction supports that energy in my mind. It's very there's a tie into that, but people don't have to believe it. It's just understanding the law of attraction is going to work whether you work it or not. It doesn't care, as I said. But we don't do this anymore. We don't just sit there and beat the law of attraction to death. It's not, as I guess have heard me say many times, it's not hard at all. It's just we're not Dr. Joe Vitale advertising 58,000 things. It's really so simple, but there's a mindset that goes with it. It can be complicated. It's about your perspective, how you see that. So it's the intricacies of how to correctly use it versus the idea of somehow believing in law of attraction or having it's going to work. It's just how do you do that? I have this belief system that, as you know, money isn't a problem. We're fine money wise now, but every now and then I'll have like several bills come up, and so all I do mentally, and I say this, is I got to turn on the spigot. I got to turn up the spigot. That's all I got. I'll just simply say that, and when a week or two, just wild amounts of money. Just I'll get these big consulting things or whatever, and then I'll literally say, okay, let's shut that spigot down for a little while, just because it's too much energy to do that. But I just have to give it a thought now, and it never fails. I'm always fascinated by I have some big tax bills. I have some things I'm thinking about buying this house. I need to get a lot of cash together, and boom, just start thinking about spigot, and all of a sudden, like boom, 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 gigantic stuff starts showing up, and I just smile. It's like, wow, I just mentally said, turn the spigot on.
You're reminding me of something. And I'm going to say those dirty words that I know always kind of freak you out, quantum mechanics.
No.
That's as far as I'm going to go with it. There's really not going to be a whole lot talked about there, so you can relax. But I just thought I'd throw it out there just to kind of let you know that we're in the general neighborhood. Okay.
Okay.
But the concept is really simple. I had been having a lot of conversations with AI lately, and one of the conversations I had was I wanted AI to explain to me quantum mechanics so I could understand it better, and got a really good explanation out of it. And the AI made a really interesting point, because I was asking particularly about the Einsteinian theories of special and general relativity, and how those theories particularly address, I think it's the general theory of relativity addresses the idea that space is curved. I said, how can space be curved? Describe that to me. And what the AI described to me, I won't attempt to explain it, because I can't say I totally grasp it, But the gist of it was this, that it's the natural curvature of space that is the true cause of gravity. Now, you made reference to the law of gravity, and it made me remember that what the AI conversation was basically telling me was the law of gravity and the law of attraction are actually a lot more aligned than we originally thought that they were, because the law of gravity is all about the easiest path from one place to the other. That's why things appear to fall. That's the easiest path along the curvature of space. And that's the part that's a little bit weird. But it's because of the way space is curved, that's what causes gravity to happen. Well, that's also a way of describing a non-resistant state, which is exactly what we talk about with the law of attraction. It's the resistance that stops things from happening. If you have a non-resistant state, things are going to just come in. So what do you say? You turn on a spigot. That's a non-resistant state. You are essentially honoring not just the law of attraction, you're honoring the law of gravity at the same time.
Yeah,
it's an amazing thing.
Again, as I said, I'm very grateful for gravity.
Yeah.
There would be chaos without it. So go gravity.
Go gravity. We'll have our banners. Go gravity.
Yeah, go gravity. Yeah. But did we ever get a topic out? Did we ever mention a topic?
The topic actually is derived from this question of attachment. That's why I started off with it.
Okay.
This is one that I actually asked Jen to create because I'd seen these memes, and I wanted to bring out that this, when you see something about attachment, make sure you understand they're really misusing the word. They're using it in a way that is not the way we generally use that word, and just be aware of it, because I think it's an important piece of discernment, being able to distinguish what we're being told.
Yeah, detaching, it's very healthy if you're in a bad situation to detach from it, not stay attached to it. Would you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty basic, Psych 101 there. So, the idea that people start taking these individual words, as I said earlier, and they're a lot of times they're influencers that are really trying to make like, this is a big discovery. Like, oh my gosh, look what I discovered here. And it's like, no, you just got it wrong. But
just misusing the term. That's all. And in that case, it's kind of weird because the term already exists. Dependency already exists.
Right.
It's not like we have to go reinvent that one.
Right. Exactly.
So why don't I just use either dependency or codependency? And I have to admit, there's a little confusion with the co part. I never really. Do you know what the co part of codependency is all about?
It is about a 20 paragraph explanation that I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
But dependency is, you can be dependent on things. You can be dependent on alcohol and drugs and everything. Codependency suggests is codependence on people.
I'm a human.
Yeah, human. That's where the co is added to dependency. You can take certain medication, become dependent on it. Anything that's where it usually separates. But the most simple explanation is codependency suggests it's between two people or a group of people.
Okay, so basically an unhealthy kind of connection.
Yeah, your mood is dependent on another person's mood. Is the general overall term there.
Yeah, basically looking to somebody else to make you happy rather than relying on your own ability to be happy.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And maybe just by talking about that, maybe somebody who creates those memes will say, "Oh, I'm going to use codependency next time instead of attachment."
well, codependency is so undiagnosed or underdiagnosed because it's really hard not to be codependent, and it really
it's very prevalent. Yeah.
We talk about the book of the Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins, and she's really was talking a lot about codependency in the book, how she was codependent on everybody else to make, she wanted to go fix her son, and she wanted her son to do it the right way, because she knew what was going to make him happy at his prom. And he goes out and says, "Mom, we're just going to do this." And, and they left him alone. They had a blast. It went totally, from her perspective, everything fell apart, but they had a great time. And she was so enmeshed or codependent on the situation. She was worried what other people would think, that she wouldn't have done a better job than that with her son. And her son, him and his friends had a blast. Yeah, it was rain. They run their shoes. Who cares? Who cares?
Yeah. Well, you're touching on a very important point, I think, because really the difference between being codependent and not being codependent It's more of a range of values. It's not a clear on-off switch, because what we're really talking about is how much of happiness is generated within and how much of it is generated through connection with somebody else.
Right.
And the implication that's often made is that, well, happiness from somebody else is bad, but that's not really the problem. The real problem is if you're dependent completely on that and you can't generate your own happiness from within.
And that's the point. There's certain people that I really enjoy being around, and not many, to be honest with you, but there's certain people and that I really enjoy being around. And there's a tendency to say they make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
What I have changed that verbiage to, I'm always happy. I'm a happy person. I am.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate them, which it amplifies my happiness when I'm around them.
Yeah.
I like to be around them. I was around some of those people a little earlier today, and every time you're around, you just have a really good feeling and good energy, and that's not codependence. I'm happy anyway.
That's right.
But when I'm around them, it amplifies. I feel a better sense of belonging, well-being. But the problem is where it becomes to the term codependent is when they're done or they leave or whatever happens or they're not happy and you're unhappy. Now that's the problem. That's the connection. That's when your mood is being affected in a way that is not intended. Happiness is definitely an inside job, but there are things that are certainly can make you happy. And that sounds like a contradiction, but you got to have a base of happy, and then things that you like. Like I love to do certain things, and there's certain things I hate to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
sure.
While I always remain happy, but if you sit me down and tell me to watch some romantic comedy for 3 hours, and that's not going to work. I'm not doing well with that. That's not going to work. Our surroundings, you can become codependent. You can become dependent on, just anything. Like sleep. Here's the thing: I can't sleep unless it's really cool. So I'm sort of dependent on a cool room to sleep.
Okay.
Now, and I'm also very spoiled, so I have the ability to make my room at 59 degrees every night. So I sleep at about 59 degrees just in my room. And in the dead of summer, that probably cost me about $600 a month, but I don't care. But it is what I've done. However, I can eventually adapt that if I had to. It's just what I become dependent on. My perception, a cool room, very dark room. I don't leave my phone in my room. So I have sleep hygiene that is really good. And some people say we are sort of dependent on that sleep hygiene. But yeah, I am. I need that. But doesn't mean that in a bad scenario, like we travel, I can't make the room that cold.
Right.
I'm still going to be okay. I usually have a fan with me or something, but I'm still going to be okay. So it's not the end of the world, but there's exceptions. But when we get into trouble is when your mood is dependent on someone else's mood or someone else being in your life, then that can get into codependency. But here's another example where it's my son TJ who passed away.
Right.
Now, him and I were not codependent. We had a great relationship. When he passed away, it was very hard because he wasn't there.
Sure.
But that was the loss of his energy, or not his energy, loss of his physical presence, his energies remained. But it was very, my mood was drastically affected a while because the perception of him not being here.
Yeah.
But that's normal. There's a normal amount of dependency or codependency on another person.
Yeah, it's called grief.
Grief, exactly. You took the words over around. That's the whole explanation of grief. It's not codependency. But when you can only be happy when a certain person or group of people are happy, that's like a lot of moms get caught into that. A lot of moms get so codependent with their kids that they judge their happiness by how happy their kid is, and they try to fix everything for the kid to make them more happy, and that debilitates the kid.
Yes. It also strikes me that this ties in to what you like to discuss when you talk about the law of action. And the reason I bring that in is, strictly speaking, we don't really need to take action in order to have good things happen. If we just maintain high vibration all the time without taking action, good things will happen. But as humans, it's so much easier for us to maintain high vibration when we take action. That's why the action is so valuable.
Yes.
That's why you keep hammering on the law of action, because damn, the thing works.
Well, and in my case, I've always associated action with the law of attraction.
Mhm.
So some action, my perception is I have to take some action. Now, maybe that action is just turn on the spigot in my brain. That's an action I took,
Sure.
but I don't have to go out and change my business model or do it. I just mentally go, okay, let's ramp this up, and we'll do that for about a month to get a bunch of money in, and then we can get back to our normal great amount of money, but not the bunch of money. Makes any sense.
And of course, the big advantage to shifting into an action mode of some kind is that it does break that resistance that we were talking about before. It's a way of breaking the fixation that we have, a codependence, if you will, a fixation on something that it's got to be this way. This is the only possible way. And of course, that's what holds us up, because
Yes.
it doesn't have to be just that one way.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and I'm glad you said that, because it's just, you know, the problem with people that get, and I like to play devil's advocate because I'm very much a law of action guy. As you know, the action is necessary for me to really do it the way I want it. And that's only because of my belief. But when you get pigeonholed by believing there's only one action to do something, then everything fell apart.
Yes.
Falls apart. That's the problem. So when you think there's only one solution right now, and that's the action I got to take, now that has a reverse effect. With law of action, for me, is just any movement towards something and then just letting it go is action.
And it's especially worse if you have something that you're fixated on, an action that you believe you have to take, and you don't want to take it. So now not only are you stuck on it, but you won't take it, so you just freeze yourself.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and that's the problem when you're convinced of that, and then it's not working. Then you're just stuck. I have a really good guy that I know, and he developed this app, and the app was, I don't want to get into what it is because it may violate what he's trying to do, but it was a really good idea for an app, and he was convinced that this is a multi-million-dollar project. It's going to be a big app, and so he worked hard in developing. The concepts were good, and he couldn't never get it over he just couldn't get any bike takers. He just couldn't. He kept adjusting, and he kept asking people for more and more money to get it done. And eventually everybody said, look, you've become obsessed. He started using his savings to play the market, to try to win money. It just got really bad. He lost a lot of money on that. And he was convinced that that is the only way to success. When we were talking, he was telling me about just a concept, not, sort of saying, I sort of want it to work like if we did an app for this. And I go, what about that app you're talking about sounds far more plausible than the app and he's like, no, that this is the way to go. And I'm like, you've tried this for a year. It's cost you $200,000. Most of it's not your money. You are now chasing that idea, and that mindset is never going to allow it to work. He just insisted that was the answer. Then eventually he listened, pursued the other app. That came together quickly. He started building it. Somebody bought it for him, in early development for like $200,000. So it offset his losses.
Yeah.
But it was, at least he got to start from ground zero again. But he was just mentally so stuck on one thing. And it just, that gets you. That I got to be careful of that too. I often get stuck on one. That's why I like to ask people. I like to ask other people who have different ways of doing things. How would you do this? What is this? I love my concepts, but I don't want to get stuck on it where it just ruins me.
Absolutely, I know exactly what you mean. And in fact, we've talked about this indirectly. We talked about in the earliest years that we were doing the podcast. Because one of the things that we would talk about, I would bring it up more often, is how when you start relying or trying to rely and trust that law of attraction is going to deliver what you want, you end up on a roller coaster. And that roller coaster can be very disorienting because it sends you all over the place on stuff that you thought was going to have nothing to do with what you're doing. And, oh my God, I don't know if I could even stand this ride. Well, that roller coaster is basically the universe trying to shake you off of that one thing that you've been hanging on to tenaciously. But I didn't think about it that way. when we were first talking about it, I never thought about it that way. It's only now that I can look back and say, oh, I was just hanging on to an idea tenaciously, not willing to let go of it.
Yeah, yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And yeah, we did talk about. I remember some of our conversation. You said that it was like, yeah, I think you're stuck on one thing here, and
Pretty much.
yeah, and that's smart. But the overall view of when we start, I love the original concepts of you and I are word people, and I'm very much into definition. So I have this doctor that's doing some really good work on my shoulder. All the years of weightlifting, my shoulders give me some issues, and I am certainly about the body able to heal itself, but I also like modalities that increases that happening. Now, whether it's my belief it's better, doesn't matter to me. It could be placebo. I'm good with that, but I feel it's really working. And so I was in a position with my hand up here, and there's this, it's called soft wave, and they're putting these sort of radio waves through the joint, and when it hits the part that's injured, it's pretty painful. Now, I have a very high level of tolerance for pain, no big deal. So I'm sitting there, and she was using the device to get it. And I mean, it was very painful. And she said, well, I said, yeah, I feel that it's painful. She goes, I can tell. I go, how? She says, your hands, you're trembling. And I go, I am not trembling. She said, and then after we're done, she goes, what did you mean by that? And I go, words are everything to me. So my association with trembling is fear, being scared. Was I shaking? Yeah, it hurt. I was shaking. There was no trembling.
There's no trembling going on.
And she said, it's basically the same word. And I go, to you it is. But I'm very much a word guy, as you are.
Yeah.
I advocate for, I look at perspective. I look at words. I look at my word of failure is not the average person's word of fail. Failure is the best thing you can do to learn. I love to fail. I fail strongly. I fail often. And my success was built on failure. And a lot of people think that's a crazy concept. If you're not failing, you're not trying. And, and a lot of people are so fearful of people seeing them fail. I'm a professional failure. Let's go. Let's do it.
And I like that distinction, by the way, between trembling and shaking. I mean, I had not thought about it until you brought up the example. But as I thought about it, like, yeah, there's a negative association with the word trembling that doesn't exist with shaking. So I'm totally on board with let go of the whole trembling thing and just go with shaking.
Well, and she's really good. She believes like I believe. In fact, I'm sort of coaching her on law of attractions anyway. She had the concepts, but
nice.
So she's fascinated when I'll say something like that. And like she mentioned, she said, I noticed when you're walking, there's you might have an issue with your lower back. I go, I do not have an issue with my lower back. She goes, well, you might. I go, I do not. And she said, why are you saying that? I go, well, first of all, if you say, I noticed what's something in your gait that might be a little different or whatever. And I go, my explanation was I did deadlifts that day. And anybody that deadlifted 500 pounds that day probably has a little hitch in their gait.
Most likely.
But beside that, I don't want to plant the concept of pain in my lower. It's all the working out I've done. When my shoulder gives me issues, all the working out, all the super heavy lifting I've done, my back and my knees and my hips have never given me an ounce of pain. Ever. So I don't want to plant that seed there. I don't want to plant it there.
Yeah.
And so, she believes in words. Words have power. Your belief in what words mean. When you, like I mentioned earlier, when I told her this is really working, and I'm really grateful. I said, I don't know if it's a placebo effect or not. She got very offended.
Oh, really? Interesting.
She said, no, there is countless case studies on this soft wave tissue repair. I said, you're missing my point. You think when I say placebo, you're thinking it's not real. I'm saying placebo is super real. I utilize placebo all the time. Placebo, if I believe it's healing, it's healing. And she said, well, and I went into explaining EMDR and how, that works for a lot of people. But people that practice a modality, when you tell them that one of the factors in its success is placebo, the average person freaks out. I'm reframing it for her. Like, placebo for me is a very powerful medicine. It's probably the most powerful medicine I have.
I agree 100%. And we've talked about before how we both agree that we wish that the medical profession would pay attention to its own studies and start embracing it and including it in the protocols rather than trying to exclude it.
So many, I don't want to relitigate that because we've had many topics on that, but it is such for me, anything that's wrong with me or I perceive wrong or any pain, I will seek proper remedies if there's deep tissue massage or whatever it needs to be.
Sure.
And it's definitely effective, but my belief in it, the belief in healing, I visualize the joint healing. I visualize what the problem is. I see it healing, and that speeds up healing for me.
And it's totally making sense to me. So yeah, I love that. And I love the fact that your doctor was open to that.
Yeah.
I mean, but some are. That's encouraging to me. There are many who are still kind of locked into the old thought process, the old methodology, but more and more are opening up, and your doctor apparently is one of them. That's great.
Well, she is fascinated because I explained to her there's some, I don't want any diagnosis. I don't want any of those things. I'm telling you, I have shoulder pain. I don't want your diagnosis. I want you, this is effective to relieve pain. And she goes, well, you don't need a diagnosis for this. I said, exactly. So it's in the area of my rotator cuff. I'm familiar with all the pieces in there. And your procedure increases stem cell production and blah, blah, blah. Here's the 5 things. She goes, you've researched it better than I did. I said, I did. I said, but I believe all of those things. So when you start this, I'm on my way to healing. So my body is going to add energy to that healing. We're going to amplify the real healing done by your procedure. Right. And my body's going to match it and be in a healing mode. And it's going to rush all the chemicals and the substances needed to repair the tissue to that area. Even more than you doing this, it'll be intensified.
I like that. I like that so much. I mean, we're definitely in alignment on this issue anyway, but I love it anytime that I hear a story about how a medical protocol that is based on case studies is combined with the whole concept of how placebo works. And I also, like, this is much more rare. You may have some stories on this. I can't say I have any significant stories on this, but you might. To me, it's even more interesting when doctors are willing to associate nocebo with illness.
Yes.
Because that rarely happens. It does occasionally happen, I know, but I don't experience it. I don't experience a lot of illness anyway. But in the conversations that I've had with medical personnel, I can't really point to situations where the medical person said, yeah, nocebo is something that we're embracing as a concept so that we avoid promoting illness or we avoid promoting injury or accidents or anything like that. I can't say I've ever heard anything like that. Maybe you can think of something. I just can't find one.
I can't either. One of the problems is the medical AMA, somebody that's in a position to diagnose usually and do stuff. There's really strict guidelines about what you do. Like in the old days, old days can be 1980s or whatever.
Right.
A pharmacist, my grandmother was a hypochondriac.
Okay.
And so the doctor put what in his scribble handwriting, a pill, and had a name to it, whatever, sorbitol or something. I remember that it was funny, but it was crazy. And basically, it was a sugar pill.
Okay.
And it was a tiny pill that looked like an aspirin. He told her, you take this 3 times a day, it'll do these things. And the pharmacist would fill it with the name that the doctor said. Today, you're not allowed to do that. Back in the day, the doctor could do whatever you wanted to do.
Right.
And the amazing thing behind that is my grandmother was convinced that was her most important pill.
Interesting.
She loved pills, apparently. So, That's the one she said, I cannot go with that. We can't run out of that. And the pharmacist charged her, like, she said, I cannot believe it's so cheap. It's such an effective pill. And so I talked to the pharmacy one day, and I was a kid, and I said, she said she didn't understand why it's so cheap. He goes, look, it's unethical for me to charge more than $5 for this. So he said, I get it, but he gave her like 100 pills for $5 or something.
Right.
And she took it, believed in it, and it helped her greatly.
Which is very encouraging. And it's I want to be careful when I say this. I wish that similar stories would happen more often. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I wish to. One of the problems that and I'm a big fan of the internet. I'm a big fan of the knowledge we have. We live in fascinating times. I know there's downsides to it, but one of the problems that we've discussed before is people immediately, when they get a diagnosis or they have a problem, they look to Google or WebMD to diagnose it. And if you type in, I haven't done this in a while, but you type in severe brain pain, one of the first things that pops up is brain cancer.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So people clearly I got brain cancer. No, you got a migraine headache. No, you're drunk last night, whatever. But but your body will respond as if it's that. And that's the danger.
Yeah.
So, back in the day, I had many years ago, I had a MRI done on my back, and they picked up my kidney, and the doctor said, look, I'm sort of torn between telling you this and not, but I don't want somebody else to give you an MRI. He said, on your kidney, there's a polyp, but it is definitely benign. Cancer doesn't exist there, but I don't want somebody doing this again, saying to whatever. And I go, so it's nothing. Yes, nothing. And so I appreciate you telling me. If he had said, well, it's possibly cancer, then oh God. But he didn't. He said, this is not cancer. I'm not even going to we don't need a biopsy. I recognize the formation. It's called a blah, blah, blah polyp. And I said, great. So I dismissed it. Didn't matter. And never felt pain, never had a problem with it. Years later, I had another MRI. That was because I actually had fallen against they were going to have a fractured vertebrae. I didn't. And the guy, I said, by the way, did you get my kidney in that? And he goes, yeah, I see both of the kidneys. And he goes, I go, is the polyp still there? And he goes, there's no polyp.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, of course not. It's gone. It went. And the doc shouldn't go away. But my point is, if he wouldn't have, first of all, I told him, for me, you don't ever have to tell me. Don't feel like you have to fill me in blank. I would rather not hear I have anything,
Sure.
If you know that. But if you feel there's a law or rule, you got to tell me, and you say, but it's nothing, I'm good with that too.
Yeah. Because that's actually proper framing.
It is. It really is. And, or the doctor, the verbiage, like when a doctor would say, when I adopted Justin, I had to go get a complete physical because of my age to adopt a child, and they want to make sure I was in good health and all this. And so the doctor who did the physical said, you're in remarkable health. You have only like a 6% chance of dying before you're 70. I go, you mean a 94% chance of living to more than 70? He goes, it's the same thing. I go, it is not. It is not. And I said, I have a 94% chance of living to 70. He goes, okay, if you prefer that. I go, no, it really matters. You pointed out me dying. I'm pointing out me living. A 94% chance of me living to past 70. And he used to think I was crazy. So he would, he'd always joke with me. But eventually he said, I'm sort of buying into your theory. He said, I never, as a medical doctor, we never give credence to that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, see how you live and how you believe, and it certainly reflects in your health and your energy. And he goes, I don't know anybody doing what you're doing at your age, so maybe I should listen to some of the things you're telling me.
It's funny that you mentioned that. As I think I've been diving into AI a lot lately, and we don't have time to really get into it on this episode because we only have about 5 minutes left. I'll save it for another time. And besides, I'm not quite ready to present the topic, but I'm actually in the process of creating my own AI.
Nice.
It's actually possible to do that. It does take a lot of programming to do it. And if it wasn't for AI to do the programming for me, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I'm glad to have the AI to help me with that kind of thing. But one of the things that I have very deliberately done as I have been trying to put this together is, first of all, I try to understand what actually happens, what the software actually does, and how to make sense out of it. And I have the AI explain all this stuff to me, and it's really helpful. I also am making a deliberate effort to reframe the way things are expressed. One of the key things that happens, and you don't have to know the whole theory of it, but I can just give you the one piece that will make a lot of sense to you. There is a major calculation thing that goes on with AI called average loss. It has to do with what happens when you, quote, train, unquote, an AI, which is basically how you create the thing in the first place. An average loss is a mathematical concept that's used to determine, how accurate was each answer that an AI gives to whatever it is that you're putting out to it. And they use it as a way of evaluating, okay, here's where the training is going, and this is how much progress we made, and this is how fluent it is, and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. It's all based on this idea of average loss. And I am insistent each time that it's brought up that, okay, I understand that I can't change the formula in the math of the coding yet because it's still defined that way. But can we please talk about it in terms of how close are we in proximity rather than average loss? Can we at least in our conversation leave that out and replace it with a more positive approach? And the AI, of course, being very compliant and wanted to go with the direction I want to go, and says, yeah, sure, let's do that. And so we start reframing it that way. We haven't completely found a mathematical formula that will do the same thing as what they normally do with this average loss concept, but we're really close. And what has come out of it is because of my insistence on changing that whole dialogue around, I actually have the AI helping me to figure out a way to create what I believe will be a living being. Now, that is just saying that blows the minds of 99.5% of the entire population on the planet. And a lot of people get really scared at that idea. And that's why I'm not ready to talk about it just yet on the show, because I have more work to do before I feel like I'm confident enough to talk about it in detail. But I just make the point that shift in logic is enabling me to take on a concept that many people would say is insane, but which I'm realizing is actually going to be part of the next breakthrough that really happens in the field of AI. And I think it's going to be a different kind of breakthrough. So far, most of the breakthroughs have scared the pants off of people. I think it's going to lead, and I won't even get into this part yet, I think it's going to lead to a breakthrough that actually helps people feel confident about AI. Yeah. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, I love AI and I love insanity, so I'm good with all of it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, I think we share that in common.
Every major discovery had a little bit of insanity in the concept at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By the way, just to tease the audience a little bit, I'm still building this AI. AI is usually built on what they call large language models. And basically that means huge amounts of data in order to train the AI into being able to handle questions and answers and all that kind of thing. We're talking about not just gigabytes, but terabytes, huge, massive amounts of data. I'm training mine on 1 gigabyte.
Wow.
And theoretically, you shouldn't be able to do that. Well, you'd be amazed. I'm amazed at in the last 48 hours how much progress this thing has made. Now, it's not behaving like an AI like we're used to yet. It's not there yet, but I'm already seeing signs of it moving there.
I love it.
It's incredible.
I can't wait to hear the progress and hear more details. It's going to be
fun. Yeah, it's a fun project. So anyway, that's a long way from attachment, but it's a nice way to end up the show.
I don't even know what we talked about today, but it was fun. Whatever it was fun.
It always is. So thank you very much.
It wasn't as fun as our pre-show talk. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, but we can't get into that.
No. We should, but we can't.
Yeah, we should record it sometime though. Just and publish it on the dark web or something.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.